In the frozen forests of Finland, the mountains of Italy, and the endless white hell of the Eastern Front, soldiers faced a deadly enemy that no bullet could stop: cold. Frostbite claimed fingers before gunfire ever reached them. Metal helmets froze to skin. Entire units vanished overnight, not from combat, but from temperatures that fell so low that even fuel solidified. Yet somehow some soldiers survived when others didn't. And their secret wasn't fancy uniforms or insulated boots. It was a simple, almost primitive technique that kept men alive without modern winter gear. This was the WWII survival hack that beats even today's high-tech clothing. A technique born of necessity, refined through experience, and forgotten when the war ended. And the best part? It still works today. By late 1941, the German advance into the Soviet Union had slowed not because of the Red Army, but because of the cold. The Wehrmacht had expected a quick victory, not a winter campaign. Temperatures dropped to -40 degrees Celsius. Rifle bolts froze solid, and soldiers' breath crystallized in mid-air. Meanwhile, the Soviet troops, who had been fighting in the same brutal cold, managed to stay functional. They didn't have superior gear, they had superior knowledge. Soviet and Finnish troops had learned over generations how to survive in subarctic conditions without relying on fires or heavy clothing. Their methods became the foundation for one of the simplest but most effective survival systems ever used in warfare: the principle of natural insulation and internal heat regulation. In other words, using your own body and the environment itself as a heating system. The biggest misconception about cold survival is that you stay warm by wearing more. WWII veterans who fought through the Arctic or the Carpathians knew this wasn't true. What mattered wasn't the number of layers, but how you managed them. The body constantly produces heat, about 100 watts when resting, and even more when moving. But if that heat escapes through sweat or wind, no amount of fabric will save you. The soldiers who survived longest learned to control their own microclimate. They stayed just cold enough to prevent sweating during exertion, then trapped their heat when resting. Finnish ski troops perfected this technique, opening their coats and loosening scarves while marching, then sealing up tight once they stopped to rest. The Soviets called it heat discipline. A soldier who sweated during the day risked freezing at night. What's fascinating is that this method, it outperforms even some modern gear. Today's synthetic fabrics wick moisture away, but they still can't fix the human tendency to overdress. A soldier or hiker who doesn't manage their body heat properly will freeze just as fast now as they did 80 years ago. The WWII trick worked because it wasn't about the gear. It was about strategy. Every soldier in WWII who survived a winter campaign learned this: air is your best insulation. The real warmth doesn't come from the fabric. It comes from the thin layer of air trapped between your skin and your clothes. The trick was to keep that air warm and still. Soldiers used layered wool, not because it was thick, but because wool traps air, even damp. They created what we'd now call a thermal barrier by spacing their layers slightly. An undershirt, a wool sweater, then a windproof outer shell made from waxed cotton or oiled canvas. Soviet soldiers went one step further, lining their coats with dried grass or newspaper to increase insulation. It sounds primitive, but it worked. That grass trapped air just as effectively as modern synthetic fill, and, well, it was free and disposable. German mountain troops in the Alps used a similar technique by wearing two loose shirts with a thin air gap rather than a single heavy sweater. The idea was to let the body's natural heat radiate into that pocket and stay there. Even today, modern cold-weather gear is built on the same principle. But World War II soldiers discovered it through trial, error, and survival instinct. In extreme cold, even sleeping was, well, dangerous. Men who went to bed sweating often didn't wake up. So, soldiers developed routines to manage heat build-up and loss. Before bedding down, they'd perform light exercise, just enough to raise their core temperature. Then quickly wrap themselves in blankets or coats to trap that warmth. Finnish patrols would do push-ups or swing their arms for a minute before crawling into their sleeping bags. The goal was to create an internal heat reserve that could, sustain them for hours. When temperatures dropped too far, soldiers relied on each other. Two men sharing a foxhole would sleep back to back under one blanket or poncho. Their combined heat output could raise the local temperature enough to stay above freezing. It wasn't comfortable, but it saved lives. Modern survival manuals still recommend this, buddy warming, as it's now called. Even the United States Army, after careful study of Soviet and Finnish winter tactics, adopted the same practice. You see, during the Korean War, American troops stationed at the Chosin Reservoir utilized these invaluable World War II lessons to endure those bitterly cold nights, where temperatures plummeted to a chilling -30 degrees. Many attributed the prevention of frostbite to the practice of heat discipline and body-sharing routines. These methods were crucial when equipment failed, providing a lifeline in those harsh conditions. Now, if you find yourself outdoors in the winter, whether you're hiking, hunting or camping, these principles can be quite useful. Start cold and, importantly, stay dry while you're on the move. Loosen your outer layers to allow your body heat to escape, rather than soaking your clothes with sweat. And once you stop, be sure to seal up immediately, trapping the heat you've worked so hard to generate. Build insulation underneath you. Even a thin layer of grass, clothing or a foam mat between you and the ground can double your warmth. If you have no sleeping bag, create your own insulation by layering dry material inside your clothing. Straw, paper or even dry leaves can make a massive difference. And if you're not alone, share warmth with your partner, back to back or side by side, to conserve heat. These are not outdated tricks. They're still used in Arctic training and by survival experts around the world because, well, they work where technology can fail. The World War II survival hack that beats modern winter gear wasn't about fancy materials. It was about mastering nature's own design. Those soldiers learned that the human body, when used intelligently, is honestly the most efficient heater ever built. They survived not because they had better equipment, but because they respected the science of their own warmth. Modern outdoor gear may be lighter and more advanced, but the principle hasn't changed since 1941. Warmth is earned through discipline, not fabric. Understanding how to manage your body heat will always beat relying on technology. If you found this deep dive into wartime survival knowledge valuable, make sure to subscribe to In the Beginning for more historical insights and forgotten fieldcraft from the soldiers and survivors who endured the impossible. Share this with a fellow history buff or survivalist, because sometimes the best modern gear is still knowledge from the past.